Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever it is, wherever you are, whoever you are, and welcome once again to Full Fat Spoiler Chat, brought to you by the folks here at Nerd Caliber. I'm Rodney Brown. I'm the editor in chief of Nerd Caliber, first person shooter on Facebook as a cosplay photographer, Burley underscore adopter on Twitter and some other places as a tech journalist. Tonight's topic is, if you didn't see it on the list, the title, the recent adaptation of Stephen King's novel The Stand, the miniseries that was on CBS All Access. That just wrapped up about the middle of this month. So if you haven't seen this version of The Stand, or read the books, or seen the original 1994 miniseries, and you don't want it spoiled for you, I would suggest that you find some other thing to watch. Otherwise, if you are fine with that, either having it spoiled for you or you're familiar with the recent miniseries and or the books and so on, then please hang around, ask questions in the chat. It is just me tonight. We don't have a larger team as we usually do. Everybody's busy. So this will probably be a pretty quick show, unless you guys have lots of questions, which would be really cool. But either way, I'm going to welcome those people who are already in the chat. Samantha Bauer, welcome. Embo was taken, welcome. Megan Ostender, welcome. Alondra Cervantes, welcome. Acacia Lima, welcome. And I think that's everybody in there so far. Once again, this is a show talking about a recent piece of nerd entertainment, in this case, The Stand, and we talk about everything that's important in this show, which means there are spoilers all the way through it. It's up to you if you want to hang around or not. So, but you've been warned. This is big spoilers all up in there anyway. And it's at the title of the show, Spoiler Chat. So, first off, what we usually do is we talk about the sort of history of where this stuff came from. So Stephen King, the U.S. author, born and raised in Maine, wrote this novel, was published in 1978. When he first wrote it, it was published at about 800 plus words, which he went on to say was about 2/3 of what he had originally written, and his publishers told him to either cut it down by a lot or they'd have to publish it as 2 books. 1990, just 12 years later, he wound up republishing it in The Stand, the complete and uncut edition, where it, pardon me, put back in all of the stuff that he had to cut out at his publisher's request. And that came in, depending upon the edition, 1,100 plus words to almost 1,300. So it's a monster book. Even at the lower end of that, at the 1,100 plus, it's still the biggest book he's ever published, bigger than It, which is the next largest, at just under 1,100 words. The story is, and here we're getting into spoiler territory, or maybe not, because I won't get into any super details, but the story is a flu that was a bioweapon broke out of a facility and wound up killing about 99.4%, about 99.4%, so a little over 99% of the human population, or at least the United States population. That's where all of this takes place. And even in the book, there's almost no discussion of what's happening outside the U.S. But because there's also no anybody coming to attempt to rescue anybody in the U.S., you got to figure it's 99% plus of the entire world. The survivors find themselves seeing visions of an old black woman, Mother Abigail Fremantle, and or a person they just call the Dark Man, and generally known as Randall Flagg and a whole bunch of other things, the Walking Dude. And depending upon where they stand on sort of a morality rainbow or spectrum, they gravitate towards one or the other. Many of the main characters, the main protagonist characters, they find themselves attracted to Mother Abigail, and others find themselves attracted to Flagg, and it ultimately boils down to this is a pretty biblical conflict for where humanity will go after this, either good or evil. And that's basically the general gist of the plot. Um, at this point, what we usually do, and what I will do, is we talk about things that we liked and disliked about this particular version or this particular piece of work, if it's a brand new, never before created piece of intellectual property. This, of course, had a miniseries back in 1994, and of course, it's based on a book. Well, as far as I can tell, this is actually based on the second publishing, the 1990 version that is complete and uncut. It has information at the beginning. It shows you kind of how the mistake that happened that allowed this disease that they call Captain Trips to get out, which they didn't show in any real way in the first miniseries. And it does have some of the epilogue. And in fact, Stephen King specifically wrote a final episode that expands on his own epilogue that was in the 1990 book. So what I liked about this, the cast is fantastic. Bring up just some of the images here. The I guess you would say primary protagonists, Stu Redman, James Marsden is there to the right of the screen. Franny Goldsmith off to the left. Then you've got Glenn Bateman as Greg Kinnear. All did an excellent job. Whoopi Goldberg as Mother Abigail, absolutely fantastic job. I didn't pick up a picture of him. Alexander Skarsgård as Randall Flagg is amazing. And one of the minor characters, well, not minor characters, he's actually super important, but he doesn't have a lot of time in the book or the miniseries. Trashcan Man is played by Ezra Miller from Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them series, and also his little bit in Batman v Superman, of course, his big role in Justice League and the upcoming The Flash movie. This actor with Franny here, this is the character Harold Lauder, and I'm going to look up the actor's name because I can't remember his name. It is Owen Teague, is amazing. The original miniseries had an actor, Howard Nemick or something like that, and he was a typical late 80s, early 90s sort of, not pretty boy, but he didn't look like the absolute weaselly character that Harold is, and this guy, Owen Teague, absolutely nails it. Excellent job by everybody, including Nadine, one of the people who ultimately starts in Mother Abigail's camp, and like Harold, winds up not being essentially seduced over to the dark side, to use the Star Wars terminology. Nadine is played by Amber Heard, and I really don't like Amber Heard in almost anything I've seen, particularly Aquaman. That performance was just, nails on a chalkboard. She's pretty good here. I've got to give her kudos for this. This is a decent role. Well, it's a good role. It's a meaty role, and she brings, I think, a lot more nuance to it than the actress in the 1994 series. Not to give that actress any, cast any shade on her, but Heard does a better job. And again, making the character more sympathetic to the audience, even though she is ultimately an antagonist, and that's really good. Henry Zaga, an actor I know almost nothing about, plays Nick Andros, who's one of the most important characters, and he does a fantastic job. Again, a little bit, I would say, better than Rob Lowe, who played the character in the 1994 miniseries. And I would guess that that Rob Lowe, being as popular as he was in the early 90s, through the 80s and the early 90s, probably the reason why they changed in that miniseries what happens to Nick in the book and in this series. This series, while they have to cut out a lot of stuff, and there's no way around it. This series hews a lot closer to the book in most details of plot and story. Now, there's a couple of things they change. You know, in the original miniseries, Larry Underwood was I can't think of the actor's name, but he was played by a white man. He's played by a black man in this series, which I don't recall in the book if he's ever described, you know, given any characterization about race or not. They're both musicians. That's what Larry Underwood's character is, and okay, that's fine. That works really well for me. In this series, Ralph Brentner is actually Ray Brentner, and is a woman and a Native American, which is kind of a neat change. It has no bearing whatsoever on the plot or any of the things that happen, but it's just a nice, you know, there's no reason not to mix some of these characters up. Unlike, of course, Stu and Franny, who are a couple. You know, Franny is pregnant, so you know, it kind of has to be, you know, where it has to be. And other than that, most of the acting, most of the actors are really good. They do a very solid job. The production value overall is really high. There's not much as far as special effects that are required, other than some of the pretty simple supernatural effects that Randall Flagg pulls off. The big effects at the end with, and again, this is spoiler chat, folks. Big spoiler, if you haven't read the book, when Trashcan Man brings a nuke into Las Vegas and an act of God essentially sets it off, that's a wonderful effect. That whole scene goes on a little too long, but it's well done from a CGI standpoint and a practical effects standpoint. They do a pretty good job. Most of what this does, more than the original series did, is gore effects. Because this is on CBS All Access, it's a streaming platform, there's lots of swearing. There's a lot more gore than in the 1994, you know, broadcast on CBS version, which makes sense. There was no way they were going to put that kind of gore into it. So they lean pretty heavily into that, into the horror special effects and the gore special effects, because it's a horror novel. It's a kind of science fiction, kind of fantasy horror novel, and they do a good job. It's really impressive, pretty scary, sometimes really disgusting, you know, it conveys way more realistically the imagery that's in the book than was originally in that miniseries. I didn't bring up any of the really scary stuff here, just not to scare people. Because it's on CBS All Access, one of the things is you get a little bit more of a clear view of what Las Vegas is like under Randall Flagg. You know, with, you know, these people in the hallway, you know, drinking, doing drugs, getting ready to have sex. Mr. Krakowian, welcome to the show. Once again, full fat spoiler chat on The Stand, the one that just ended a couple of weeks ago, here in 2021. So that's what we're spoiling. Fair warning if you're going to hang around. So let's see. Anything else that I really want to call out that I liked? The use of the music is pretty good, although it's sometimes a little heavy-handed. And that leads me into one of the things I didn't like. And these are just this only happens twice in the series, but for some reason they do it this way. They have a musical sort of montage of traveling, and it's traveling that you don't really need to know. They've explained where they start, like in one case in Boulder, Colorado, which is where Mother Abigail's people are. Aaron Medina, welcome to the show. Aaron, we're spoiling The Stand, the 2021 version that ended just a couple of weeks ago on CBS All Access. So if you haven't read the book, seen the original miniseries, or seen this one, particularly this one, because there are some differences, then, you know, you probably don't want to keep listening or watching. So those they're going from Boulder, Colorado to Las Vegas, and a couple of times they do this same thing. They do this, you know, montage to a sort of alt country indie folky kind of song, and it goes on for too long. It's people have said where they're going, where they're starting from. You see them leave, you know they're getting there. You don't need 2/3 of a 3-minute song, or like 2 minutes of different shots of people walking through the admittedly beautiful southern Colorado, Utah landscape. Yeah, it looks gorgeous. Doesn't need to happen. The only other complaint I have is I think they gave a little short shrift to Trashcan Man, and particularly because it's Ezra Miller. You pay Ezra Miller money, and granted, it's not like you're getting Tom Cruise or something, but still, it's Ezra Miller. You pay Ezra Miller money, one would assume you want to use him a little bit more than you did, and they cut out a number of his scenes from his introduction to his ultimate resolution of bringing the nuke into Las Vegas. In the original 1994 miniseries, Matt Frewer played him, a completely different portrayal. I love Matt Frewer's version. I really like Ezra Miller's version. But they gave Matt Frewer more of Trashcan Man's scenes from the book than Ezra Miller has in here. And I don't know whether they filmed them and then they just didn't have time for it, with it get cut out for that reason, or whether they never filmed it at all. That it was, basically, we're going to introduce him, we're going to bring him in, to get his instructions for the huge plot point that he's going to, deal with. We're going to show him get the nuke, and then we're basically going to cut out everything else in between, and he's wheeling it into Vegas. That's a disappointment. So there's one other really big thing that I didn't particularly care about this, and I have to admit, I don't remember this from the novel itself or from the original miniseries, but looking back at it, it's there, and that is the subtext to this particular piece of work. In some cases, the straight-up text, but certainly the subtext. And that is, this is the alt-right, conservative Christian Bible-thumping version of the apocalypse. And that's really weird because Stephen King isn't that guy. So I'm not sure if this was Stephen King just sort of, flexing with this idea of, wouldn't it be interesting to pit traditional biblical values versus the anti-version of traditional biblical values. And I'm not going to call those evil values, even though the story clearly does, because there are a lot of things that are presented in here that only happen in Las Vegas, the home of the evil, where Randall Flagg is, who draws the evil people to him. And therefore, they are clearly presented as being on the side of evil. First one is zero gay representation, zero representation of anything other than vanilla heterosexual relationships in the good side, Boulder, versus absolutely blatant representation of not only gay relationships, but gay sex. Obviously not hardcore. They're not going to show that. So it's, a couple of guys in, like, I don't know, leather underwear or whatever, in Las Vegas, where people are supposedly evil. And I mean, there's nothing in Boulder. There's scenes that imply that Stu and Franny have sex. Franny is pregnant with the child. She was pregnant at the very beginning of the book and the series. She's pregnant with the child of somebody who did die. And so this isn't Stu's. We don't know, therefore, for sure that they've even had sex, even though they are the couple at the core of this book. There's no representation in Boulder that I recall in the book, although it's been a long time since I've read it, but certainly not in this miniseries, of anything other than white bread, heterosexual, male-female relationships. There's nobody in either side. Well, that's not, maybe not entirely true. There's certainly nobody in Boulder that is trans that we ever see. They never show anybody who could even, as far as we know, be that person. They certainly never make a point of saying that anybody who is not cis and hetero exists in Boulder. There may be some trans people shown in some of the scenes in Las Vegas. They may also just be incredibly fabulous people. But there are certainly very, very fabulous, what's the term I'm looking for? I can't remember it. But basically, representation of people who one would normally associate with either drag or trans or gay or some intersection of all of those in Las Vegas. And that's the only place in this that you see them. Now, you can make the argument that that's in here because the difference is Boulder, you don't put your sexuality out on display, and Las Vegas, where the evil people are, that's part of being evil, is you put your sexuality out on display, and that's bullshit. That's just, it is absolutely Bible-thumping, right-wing view of sexuality. And, I can see Stephen King exploring that in a book in, 1978. Whether he believed that then or not, he certainly doesn't now. If you follow Stephen King's Twitter, he is really liberal. So I'm kind of shocked that this portrayal of that kind of, Old Testament biblical morality, King allowed to be part of this. When he was so involved that he wrote a brand new piece of the story to expand on the epilogue that is the 10th episode of this miniseries. So that is absolutely one of the things that I dislike about this miniseries. It didn't stop me from enjoying, the production itself, how they told the story, the actors who are really good, the special effects, as I've mentioned, particularly the supernatural effects and the gore effects. But it's so blatantly out there that I got to call it out. That it's really disturbing to me that this would be presented as, the way to look at the world in 2021. Nobody on the good side is anything other than cis and hetero, as far as we know, and it wouldn't have taken, but one dialogue line among one side character somewhere to make that not the case. At one of the barbecues or parties, or when they bring up the lights for the first time, or any of the stuff that happens in Boulder, just have two men hugging and kissing. Done. As far as I can tell, there's no lesbian representation, and that's the easy way out for Hollywood. It's like, oh, okay, we want to show acceptance of non-hetero lifestyle. We'll have two women kissing. There's not even any of that. There's a ton of that, and every other kind of non-cis, non-hetero representation in Las Vegas, the land of the evil people. So, big knock on the whole series for me because of that. And if that is in fact the case in the book, again, which I don't remember enough about the book to really know about whether King called out the stuff that was happening in Vegas that that the spies, and then ultimately the ones who were supposed to be spies but got captured, see. And he does mention that they see, blatant sexuality and, people doing sex acts and so on. In my mind, as probably an example of, these are people who have no rules, and if you have no rules, you're probably not a good person. But if he doesn't in the book specifically call out any of the, non-cis, non-hetero acts that these people see, then why would they do it in the movie? I mean, in the miniseries, and they do. There's no question. So yeah, that's a problem for me. And honestly, it's kind of a problem for me that Ezra Miller would be involved in this. Ezra Miller, being one of the most, blatant supporters of LGBTQ plus everything. So again, that really bothers me. It's going to continue to bother me. I don't know that there's ever going to be a resolution to this. It would be nice to see someone call King out and have him address this. So Stephen King, if you're listening, tell me why you let that happen. That really, really bothers me, and I'm sure it bothers an awful lot of other people. One of the other things, so I talked about his expansion of the epilogue from the expanded book, the 1990 version of the book, into that final episode 10. And that bothers me because it has no function, no purpose whatsoever except to explain, to state the cyclical nature of the fact that good and evil will always be fighting. That's pretty easily done in what was his original epilogue, which was just that, Flag shows up on a beach somewhere, and a bunch of, pre-civilization natives start worshiping him. So, that is literally all you need to show. He wrote an entire episode, an hour's worth of show, that then all it does is hammer home with some completely unnecessary drama. Franny, this is true to the end of the book. Franny and Stu decide that Boulder is getting on, it has gotten on its feet. Everything is looking good, and Franny really wants to go back home to Ogunquit, Maine. Shout out to Ogunquit. And this is another thing that just occurred to me. Ogunquit is famous for being a very open town in Maine, incredibly popular with non-hetero couples and families and so on. And yet, here we got this miniseries that pretty much makes it clear through the subtext anyway that non-hetero ain't the way to go. In the books, in the miniseries mind. So anyway, they leave for Ogunquit, and that's in the book too. In this epilogue, we see their travels, and in one case, Franny does some really stupid thing, or a really stupid thing, makes a mistake, kind of gets tricked by Flag, but winds up falling into a well, injuring herself to the point of probably facing death. While she's at the edge of death's door, Flag tries to tempt her with healing her, as long as she'll let him be sort of a spy through her eyes. She does a "get thee behind me, Satan," even though he's not really Satan. And then a reincarnated Mother Abigail, a black girl of looks like maybe 10, 12. Essentially helps to rescue her and saves her, and just hammers home that the message of this is that you have to be true to yourself and to your belief and to others, and in the face of people who are not, you have to make a stand. You have to stand. There's the book, The Stand. It's in the book. It's in the book's title. It's clear throughout the entire presentation of the miniseries, including the penultimate episode, which should be the final episode, is The Stand. And there's no reason to hammer this home. And yet we get an entire episode 10 just beating us over the head with, it's like Stephen King said, I don't think people got the message. Let's literally spell it out multiple times, word for word, over the course of an hour. I'm like, it didn't need to happen. It's nice that we get the idea that this is a cyclical thing, and people will always be tempted that there will always be evil and good in the world. In which case, why is there a conflict to begin with? If there's always going to be evil and good in the world, why did we have the conflict with Randall Flagg in the first place? There's always going to be a Randall Flagg. If it is true that there will always be a balance of evil and good, then Flagg couldn't have won, because there has to be a balance. So now that I think about it, even that fix at the end negates most of the story. Flagg survives the nuclear Holocaust. Mother Abigail is reborn, and we start all over again with a couple of 100,000 people spread out over the entire globe, and it's going to happen again and again. So if that is the case, there's no point for the story. Flagg couldn't have won. Mother Abigail can't win technically. If you think that Flagg's winning is to either wipe everybody out or turn everybody evil, it can't happen. Based on this resolution from the epilogue of the book and the resolution that's at the end of this particular miniseries. So that's a weakness, now that I think about it, of that expanded version. The original version didn't have that epilogue. Flagg was defeated. That was it. And so that particular vessel of devotee of evil, as he says in the miniseries pretty clearly, he's not Satan. And if you read any of the stuff about Randall Flagg and how King has made him essentially the big bad guy in most of the larger connected stories that he's done, Walter from The Gunslinger is a version of Randall Flagg, or is Randall Flagg under a different name. So that just threw me off from my original point on that. Anyway, the idea is that he's always going to be around, and even though the book ended with his destruction, which may have given people a reprieve for a while, having that epilogue changes that, and it negates kind of the whole point of the book, which is too bad, because King's a better writer than that. I think that pretty much sums up the dislikes that I had with the story. It also covered, in a large part, what I think this miniseries is thematically and tonally. Tonally, it's not much different than any other supernatural horror kind of story. There are parts of this story that could fit perfectly in True Blood, which of course came a lot later, was written a lot later. Tonally, it fits in that. It's a supernatural horror story that is set in a post-apocalyptic universe, but that's not necessarily the tone of this. It is a supernatural horror story, unlike Robert Kirkman's The Walking Dead comic book and TV series. And honestly, I prefer the idea of evil being something that anybody can either do or get sucked into, and good is doing the right thing in very complicated decisions, and sometimes not necessarily doing what would be traditionally the good thing. Kirkman's Walking Dead is a very morally complex story, with one sort of exception, and that's Negan. And even Negan isn't straight up evil. And Negan in the comic book and in the series to some extent gets a bit of a redemption. And the people who we would consider truly good, particularly in the comic book, they make some very tough, sometimes very wrong decisions. I like that portrayal of evil, and I think that portrayal of evil is much more grounded and therefore more disturbing to me, because it could really happen, um, as opposed to the idea that, you know, there's a supernatural evil who's getting into people's minds and tempting them with, you know, supernatural, you know, gifts and you know, things, and it's, you know, yeah, that's the story. You know, what if at the end of, if it wasn't supernatural, The Stand would essentially be a novel version of The Walking Dead, or David Brin's book and the subsequent movie made of the Costner movie, The Postman. Because in the book, more so than in the movie, but in both of them, you have a very, just a human character who is really, truly an awful, awful person. You know, a Hitler-esque, a Pol Pot-esque, you know, complete megalomaniacal demagogue, and draws similar people who use his, who are willing to use his, you know, charismatic personality and his lack of morality to do the horrible things that they would want to do anyway, just now with the protection of a larger group of people around them. So, you know, if it wasn't for the supernatural part of this, that's what it would be. It would be The Postman, the book, much better than the movie. But it is a supernatural story, and they do the supernatural elements really well in this miniseries. And I can't fault that for the for what it is. That is what it is. That being said, I will always have a problem with any anything that portrays God as an actual entity, and who, even though he works through people for the most part, except for the act of God at the end, who, you know, if he actually really exists, he doesn't really care at all about the people that supposedly are on his good side. He lets plenty of them die. Many of the ones in Las Vegas are starting to reject Flag's control just before the nuke goes off. So he obliterates, like atomizes, people who are taking a path on a redemption. And, you know, I gotta say, that's really Old Testament biblical stuff. You know, in theory, Jesus came down here so that people could be forgiven of their sins. There was no chance whatsoever for any of those people who were starting to, you know, reject Flag's way of thinking to get their redemption. Done. So, but again, that's me not really particularly caring for the supposed logic of, you know, a story in which God is essentially a character, an off-screen character almost entirely. But, you know, there's no question God is a character in this. So, you know, those are my criticisms of the work in general, and particularly this miniseries. Again, I liked it. I thought the production values were very good. I thought that the acting was very good. I thought that the CG work, the special effects work, particularly the gore effects, were really good. And you know, I'm not happy with how it portrayed sexuality and how it portrayed what it thought was good versus what it thought was evil. And that was just about as reactionary and conservative a viewpoint as I've seen in media in decades. So for me, this is, you know, because of that enormous caveat, I would not recommend this to my friends. As much as I like the work of the people involved, I just don't think I could recommend people watch this who, particularly any of my friends who are not cis and hetero. You know, this doesn't portray, well, in most cases, it doesn't portray you at all And it certainly doesn't portray you in anything like a good light when it does portray people who are not cis and not hetero. So that basically wraps up. As I said, it would be a shorter show. So that basically wraps up the stand. The CBS All Access, by the way, which is changing to Paramount Plus in a less than a week or a little more than a week. So if you are a CBS All Access subscriber, I think it will change over. You'll just have to choose which one of the two subscription plans it now has instead of the single one. But it does also add an awful lot of stuff. This coming Tuesday, if you watch us here for our Nerd Week Live Nerd News Show, we'll be talking about an awful lot of things that were announced at the TCAs or the TCA, and including a lot of the stuff that's coming up with Paramount Plus. They announced a ton of planned content, a lot of it pretty deep into the nerd fandom, and not just things that we know that are coming over from CBS All Access anyway, like Picard Season 2 and Discovery Season 4, and the new Star Trek series that looks at the Enterprise prior to Kirk. All of that is, of course, happening, but they made so many more announcements. So we'll be covering a lot of that on Nerd Week Live next Tuesday. And I am just about to check what we've got coming up next week. Next week we are going to be looking at the Netflix movie Outside the Wire. Anthony Mackie plays an android, and it's sort of a military science fiction story. Looks pretty interesting. So if you have seen that or you want to watch it before our show, tune in next Thursday, same time, 8 o'clock. As always, please stay safe, folks. Everybody out there is having problems, particularly here in Massachusetts, where I'm located, in getting an appointment for the vaccine. There are plenty of states where it's even worse than here. There are some states where it's been handled much better. Kudos West Virginia. Good job. But it's slow, and that means you still should wear the mask. You still should be washing your hands every time you go out and touch anything, and you still should keep that social distance, 6 feet apart. Please stay safe, folks, and please, all of those people who are still suffering in Texas, even though your power is on, if you're still without water, please get the help you need. Find out. There are plenty of resources out there. I don't need to tell you where they are, but please get the help you need and please stay safe. With that, we're done. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.